Have you ever thought about what happens to the gunk at the bottom of a barrel of crude oil? You know, the thick, sludgy stuff? Well, today we're going to dive into the absolutely incredible engineering that turns that low-value goop into the high-tech fuels we all rely on. It's a pretty amazing story of turning, well, basically waste into worth.
So, what do you think is a refinery's single biggest challenge? It's not what you might think. It's actually the leftovers. Yeah. See, after they pull out all the easy, valuable fuels, they're stuck with this massive amount of heavy, thick residue. And just tossing it would be a colossal waste of energy and money. So, figuring out how to get value out of that stuff, that's where the real engineering magic kicks in.
All right, so it all starts right here, inside this massive piece of equipment called an atmospheric distillation tower. They take crude oil, heat it up to around 400 degrees Celsius, and most of it turns into a hot vapor. Now, as that vapor rises up through the tower, it starts to cool. It's kind of like sorting molecules by size, you know? The lightest, smallest ones make it all the way to the top before turning back into liquid. The heavier ones, they condense on these trays lower down. This whole process is called fractional distillation, and it's how we get our first batch of products, like naphtha, which is a key ingredient for gasoline, and kerosene for jet fuel.
But what about the stuff that's just too heavy to vaporize, even at that scorching 400 degrees? Well, that sinks right to the bottom. It forms this thick, almost tar-like substance they call atmospheric residue. And let me tell you, in this form, it's not very useful at all. So here's the billion-dollar question. How do you get more fuel out of that?
Okay, so this is where things get really clever. We're talking about a genius bit of chemical engineering. It's like a physics hack they used to solve a very, very hot problem.
Now, you might be thinking, hey, why not just crank up the heat? Simple, right? Well, not so fast. If you heat this heavy residue anymore, those big hydrocarbon molecules, they literally start to break apart and just burn. It's a process called thermal cracking, and it's bad news. It degrades the oil, clogs up all the equipment with this nasty tar-like stuff called coke, and completely ruins any potential products. So yeah, more heat is definitely not the answer here.
And this is the brilliant part. If you can't raise the temperature, what do? You change the other variable, pressure. Just think about boiling water for a second. If you're on top of a super high mountain where the air pressure is way lower, water actually boils at a much cooler temperature than it does down at sea level. Well, refineries do the exact same thing, just on an industrial scale.
So what they do is they take that atmospheric residue and pipe it over to a second, even larger tower. This one is called the vacuum distillation unit, or VDU for short. And inside this thing, they use these incredibly powerful pumps to create a near vacuum. By dropping the pressure so low, they can get those super heavy oils to boil at a much, much lower temperature, one that's safely below the point where that destructive thermal cracking we just talked about would happen.
So let's just quickly compare these two steps, right? The first one, the atmospheric tower, does the initial kind of rough separation of crude oil at normal everyday pressure. The vacuum tower, though, that's the specialist. It takes only that heavy residue, operates under crazy low pressure, and it has one very specific goal: get those valuable heavy gas oils out of there without burning and destroying them. Simple as that.
Okay, so we've safely separated the heavy oils. That's a huge win. But they're still made of these big, clunky molecules that are just too large for something like gasoline. So what's next? Well, now we have to break them up. And that brings us to a process called catalytic cracking.
This next stage is called catalytic cracking, and honestly, the name says it all. We are literally going to crack those long, heavy hydrocarbon chains, smash them into smaller, lighter, and way more valuable molecules that we need for things like high-performance fuels. And that catalytic part, that's the secret sauce. It means we use a special substance to make this whole reaction happen with incredible speed and efficiency.
So here's the play-by-play. First, they take those heavy gas oils we got from the vacuum unit and heat them up to about 500 degrees Celsius. Then they mix them with this super fine powder, which is the catalyst. It's often a type of clay called zeolite. And as soon as they mix, bam, those large molecules violently break apart, they crack. And then they reform into the smaller molecules we're actually after for gasoline and other good stuff.
So if we could zoom in and see the molecules, this is what's happening. You start with this big, long, clumsy molecule. You see it there, C16H34. After the cracking process, it's been busted up into smaller, much more useful molecules like CH18, which is a key component in gasoline. It's basically industrial-scale alchemy, right? We're turning heavy, low-value oil into high-octane fuel.
And the benefits of doing it this way, they're huge. As one of our sources points out, the catalyst makes the whole process faster and it uses less energy. But here's the really crucial part. It doesn't just make more gasoline, it makes better gasoline. We're talking the high-quality, high-octane stuff that modern engines are built for.
So after all that, all the heating, the vacuuming, the cracking, what's the big payoff? Well, it's pretty simple. A dramatic increase in the amount of valuable fuel we can squeeze out of every single barrel of crude oil.
Okay, let's follow the entire journey on this diagram here. So crude oil comes in and hits the atmospheric tower first. The gunk from the bottom, the residue, gets sent over to the vacuum unit. What comes out of there is something called vacuum gas oil, or VGO. And that VGO is the stuff that gets fed into the fluid catalytic cracker, or the FCC. The FCC does its magic, breaks down the molecules, and boom, out comes a huge stream of gasoline. It's this complex, really interconnected system, all designed to squeeze value from every last drop.
And the difference this whole process makes is, well, it's staggering. Just look at this. Without advanced stuff like cracking, you get a pretty small slice of gasoline out of a barrel of crude. But when you take those heavy leftovers and crack them, you can dramatically increase how much gasoline you get. And that's absolutely essential for meeting the massive global demand for fuel.
Of course, this isn't just about making more gasoline, as important as that is. These processes actually let refineries precisely engineer a whole range of different fuels for very different jobs.
This chart here really shows you the different paths these fractions can take. Take a look. If you follow the kerosene, for example, you can see it gets routed to something called a hydrotreater to eventually become jet fuel. And meanwhile, that vacuum gas oil we've been talking so much about, that gets sent right to the FCC to make gasoline. Every single fraction has a specific job and a specific destination, all to create a highly engineered final product.
So, what's really the difference between all these fuels anyway? I mean, can't you just put one in the other? No way. Gasoline is for the spark ignition engines in our cars, and it needs a high octane rating to stop that awful engine knock. Diesel is for compression ignition engines, think big trucks, and for them, it's all about something called a cetane rating. And jet fuel, that's made from kerosene for turbine engines, and its most important feature is a super low freezing point. You really don't want your fuel freezing up at 30,000 feet. So no, they are absolutely not interchangeable.
And really, that's the bottom line here. From that first separation in the atmospheric tower, to the vacuum unit, and then all the way to the catalytic cracker, this entire incredibly complex multi-stage process is designed for one main reason: to squeeze every last drop of value and every possible gallon of fuel out of a single barrel of crude oil. When you step back and look at it, this is a story about turning waste into something incredibly valuable, all through human ingenuity. And it really makes you wonder, right? If we can get this clever about transforming the stickiest, most useless gunk from crude oil into high-tech fuel, what other leftovers out there in the world are just waiting for their own brilliant engineering solution? Something to think about. Thanks for joining me.